For thousands of years, every child in the galaxy grew up hearing stories about the first rule. It was engraved on the walls of ancient academies, etched into the hulls of diplomatic starships, and spoken during the oath every Galactic Council representative took before assuming office. The rule itself was astonishingly simple: never harm a human child. Yet despite its importance, almost no one could explain why it existed. Historians described it as an ancient relic from the founding of the Galactic Alliance. Politicians dismissed it as symbolic. Military commanders treated it as another legal restriction among thousands. Over countless generations, the reason behind the law had faded into obscurity, buried beneath layers of forgotten history. The rule survived, but its purpose had become nothing more than a legend. The Galactic Council chamber floated high above the ecumenopolis world of Varkani's Prime, a city-covered planet considered the political heart of civilized space. The circular hall stretched nearly a kilometer across, surrounded by transparent walls that overlooked a breathtaking sea of stars. Hundreds of representatives from different species occupied their designated platforms. Towering reptilian diplomats stood beside shimmering energy beings, while insectoid scholars quietly exchanged data streams with synthetic ambassadors whose metallic faces never betrayed emotion. Every major civilization had a voice here, and for nearly 6,000 years, the Council had prevented the galaxy from tearing itself apart. At the center of the chamber stood Councillor Varkani, a young politician from the technologically advanced Zyran Dominion. Unlike many elder representatives, Varkani had built his reputation by challenging old traditions. He believed progress required abandoning outdated beliefs, and today's agenda offered him the perfect opportunity. He looked around confidently before speaking. Esteemed delegates, we continue to allow one ancient law to dictate military strategy without understanding its origin. The first rule has no scientific explanation, no historical evidence beyond fragmented myths, and no practical value in modern governance. A murmur spread through the chamber. Varkani continued. Our intelligence reports show increasing human expansion into contested sectors. Their colonies now occupy worlds once claimed by other civilizations. Yet our commanders are forced to operate under restrictions that apply to no other species. Why? Because of a superstition. An elderly delegate slowly rose from his platform. High Archivist Solanar belonged to the Luminari, one of the oldest races in known space. His silver robes flowed almost weightlessly as his pale eyes fixed upon the younger counselor. You mistake forgotten knowledge for false knowledge, Solanar said calmly. There is a difference. Varkani folded his arms. Then enlighten us, Archivist. Explain why every civilization must obey this peculiar rule. Solanar remained silent for several moments. Finally he answered, I cannot. Soft laughter echoed across several platforms. The records were already incomplete when my ancestors joined the Alliance, Solanar admitted. But the founders unanimously agreed upon one principle above all others. Never harm a human child. They considered that law more important than territorial disputes, trade agreements, or military alliances. Varkani smiled. So even the oldest historian in the galaxy admits he doesn't know why. I admit only that history has been lost, Solanar replied. That does not make the warning meaningless. Another delegate joined the discussion. Ambassador Karan of the Drakari leaned forward, his deep voice rumbling through the chamber. The archivist speaks wisely. My people have followed the first rule for over 4,000 years. We have never questioned it. Exactly, Varkani answered. No one questions it. We obey because our ancestors obeyed. That is not governance. That is blind faith. Several younger representatives nodded in agreement. Above the chamber, enormous holographic displays projected maps of the Orion frontier, a distant region where human colonies had expanded rapidly during the previous century. Rich deposits of exotic minerals had transformed the frontier into one of the galaxy's most valuable territories. Unfortunately, several neighboring civilizations claimed those same systems, and diplomatic negotiations had stalled for years. Council Speaker Now, an imposing woman from the aquatic Sarathi species, activated the central display. The matter before us concerns Operation Silent Horizon. A limited military intervention has been proposed to secure disputed orbital installations. Civilian casualties are expected to be minimal. Varkani stepped forward immediately. Our commanders have assured us the operation targets only military infrastructure. Human settlements will receive advance evacuation warnings. There is no reason to delay. Archivist Solener's expression hardened. And if something goes wrong? Our military is capable of precision beyond imagination. And if something still goes wrong? Solener repeated. Silence settled across the chamber. The old archivist slowly looked at every representative before speaking again. The first rule exists because someone far wiser than us believed it necessary. We do not possess all the answers. That should make us cautious, not arrogant. Varix shook his head. Fear of forgotten myths has held this council back for centuries. Far from the political heart of the galaxy, Commander Elias Mercer stood aboard the exploration cruiser Resolute Dawn as it drifted peacefully above the frontier colony of Haven's Reach. Unlike most military officers, Mercer preferred diplomacy over combat. 25 years in service had taught him that wars rarely ended when one side won. They ended when both sides became too exhausted to continue. His executive officer, Lieutenant Mara Chen, entered the observation deck carrying a data tablet. The council's debate is still ongoing, she reported. Mercer gazed through the panoramic window toward the green world below. Vast forests covered the continents, interrupted only by small cities carefully integrated into the landscape. Tiny transport ships moved between orbit and the surface like glowing fireflies. Any indication of the vote? He asked. They're divided. They usually are. Mara hesitated before continuing. There are rumors they're considering military authorization. Mercer frowned. That's the last thing this frontier needs. The settlers are nervous. They have every reason to be. He watched several civilian shuttles descending toward the planet below. How many children live on Haven's Reach now? Mara checked her display. Just over 12,000. Mercer smiled faintly. I visited this colony 15 years ago. There were only 200 families then. They've built something remarkable. They have, Mercer agreed quietly. Let's hope politicians don't destroy it. Hours later, the council reconvened for the final vote. Hundreds of representatives activated their voting panels simultaneously. Brilliant streams of light raced toward the central chamber as the artificial intelligence counted every decision. Council Speaker Now watched the results appear before her. The motion passes. The chamber erupted into applause from one side and uneasy silence from the other. Operation Silent Horizon is hereby authorized. Archivist Solener closed his eyes. So it begins, he whispered. No one heard him. No alarm sounded. No stars exploded. The galaxy continued exactly as it had the day before. Yet somewhere beyond the borders of known space, deep within regions untouched for millions of years, ancient machines resting in absolute darkness registered a change so small that no modern instrument could have detected it. One by one, forgotten systems stirred from their endless slumber. Dim lights flickered across colossal structures abandoned before the rise of every living civilization. Invisible signals began traveling through the emptiness between galaxies, carrying a message that had not been transmitted since the dawn of recorded time. The first rule had not been broken yet. But for the first time in thousands of years, the galaxy had chosen to ignore the warning that protected it. Commander Elias Mercer remained on the observation deck long after Lieutenant Mara Chen had left to relay the council's decision to the crew. Outside the massive viewport, Haven's Reach rotated peacefully beneath the Resolute Dawn. From orbit, there was nothing to suggest that the colony had become the center of the galaxy's newest political crisis. Children ran through parks beneath transparent climate domes, cargo ships carried food between settlements, and construction drones continued expanding neighborhoods for the thousands of new families arriving each month. Mercer quietly clasped his hands behind his back. Politics always reaches the innocent first, he murmured. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts as Mara returned. Commander, we've received an encrypted transmission from Fleet Command. Mercer nodded. Put it through. A holographic figure appeared above the tactical table. Admiral Sophia Reynolds looked unusually tense. Commander Mercer, the Council has officially approved Operation Silent Horizon. A joint coalition fleet will arrive within 48 hours to secure the disputed orbital defense stations around Haven's Reach. Mercer frowned. Secure them peacefully, I hope. The Admiral hesitated just long enough for Mercer to understand the answer before she spoke. That depends on whether the Zyran commanders choose diplomacy. Diplomacy should have been the first choice, not the last, Mercer replied. I've been saying that for months. Admiral Reynolds sighed. I know. That's why you're being assigned as the Council's diplomatic observer. You'll accompany the coalition fleet and attempt negotiations before any military action begins." Mercer nodded once. "Then I'll do everything I can to prevent bloodshed." The hologram disappeared, leaving an uncomfortable silence on the bridge. 2 days later, dozens of warships emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Haven system. Sleek Zyran battle cruisers formed the core of the fleet, surrounded by destroyers from allied civilizations honoring their council obligations. Their arrival darkened the stars as thousands of defensive drones deployed into precise formations. On the surface below, emergency sirens echoed through every settlement. Families hurried toward underground shelters while local security forces attempted to maintain order without spreading panic. Inside the flagship Iron Verdict, Supreme Commander Kaelor Voss studied the colony through a tactical display. Unlike Varix Thul, who sought political influence, Kaelor believed only in military efficiency. He cared little for ideology and even less for diplomacy. "Status report," he ordered. An officer answered immediately. "Orbital defense platforms remain active. Human Colonial Administration requests negotiations." Kaelor barely glanced at the message. "Ignore the request." Another officer looked uncertain. "Commander Mercer of the Resolute Dawn has requested permission to board." Kaelor frowned. "Grant him 10 minutes. No more." An hour later Mercer entered the command chamber accompanied only by Mara Chen. Kaelor remained standing before the tactical display without offering a greeting. "Commander Mercer," he said flatly. "You requested this meeting." Mercer stepped forward calmly. "Because there's still time to avoid a war." Kaelor folded his arms. "There is no war. Only an enforcement action." Mercer shook his head. "Every war begins with someone saying exactly that." Several officers exchanged uneasy glances. Mercer activated a holographic map of the colony. "The orbital stations you're targeting defend civilian traffic as well as military assets. Disable them by force, and you'll cripple emergency services, hospitals, evacuation routes." Kaelor interrupted him. "Civilian evacuation orders were issued. Not everyone can leave in time," Mercer replied. "There are schools, medical centers, and thousands of children still being transported to shelters." Kaelor's expression remained cold. "Collateral damage is statistically insignificant." Mercer stared at him for several seconds before answering quietly. "Statistics don't comfort grieving parents." For the first time, Kaelor's voice hardened. "My responsibility is to complete the Council's directive." Mercer took one slow breath. "And mine is to remind you that victory without restraint creates enemies for generations." Kaelor turned back toward the tactical display. Meeting concluded. Mercer looked around the silent command bridge before speaking one final sentence. "History remembers commanders for the lives they save, not the battles they win." Without waiting for a reply, he left the chamber. Back aboard the Resolute Dawn, Mara asked, "Do you think he'll listen?" Mercer slowly removed his uniform gloves and placed them on the console. "No. Then what do we do?" He looked toward Haven's Reach below. "We help the evacuation however we can." Over the next several hours, Mercer's crew coordinated civilian transports, redirected hospital ships, and used every available shuttle to move families into reinforced shelters. Volunteers from the colony worked tirelessly beside the crew despite the growing fear spreading through the settlements. Mercer personally visited one of the evacuation centers where children waited with their parents beneath a massive underground dome. A little girl holding a worn stuffed animal approached him. "Are the scary ships leaving soon?" she asked. Mercer knelt to meet her eyes. "I'm trying to convince them to." "Will they hurt us?" she whispered. Mercer forced a reassuring smile. "As long as people keep making good choices, everything will be all right." Even as he spoke, he wondered if he believed his own words. High above the planet, Commander Kaelor finally gave the order. "Begin Operation Silent Horizon. Target orbital defense platforms only. Precision strikes authorized." One after another, brilliant beams crossed the darkness, striking automated defense satellites surrounding Haven's Reach. Massive explosions illuminated space as orbital stations broke apart into glowing debris. Human defense ships returned fire immediately, not to destroy the invading fleet but to buy more time for civilian evacuations. Mercer watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the Resolute Dawn. "Open a channel to both sides," he ordered. "Broadcast on every emergency frequency." The communications officer nodded. Moments later, Mercer's voice echoed across the battlefield. "This is Commander Elias Mercer. Cease fire immediately. Civilian evacuation is still underway. I repeat, cease fire." No one answered. Weapons continued flashing between the fleets. The fighting remained limited for nearly 20 minutes, exactly as the Council had predicted. Then a single unexpected event changed everything. One damaged human interceptor, its engines crippled, spun uncontrollably toward the atmosphere. A Zyran cruiser interpreted the movement as a suicide attack and fired an emergency interceptor missile. The missile destroyed the fighter exactly as intended, but fragments of the explosion rained downward at tremendous speed. Most burned harmlessly in the atmosphere. Several larger pieces did not. Deep beneath the city of New Horizon, thousands of civilians waited inside reinforced emergency shelters. One shelter housed nearly 400 children evacuated from nearby schools only minutes earlier. The underground facility had survived earthquakes, meteor impacts, and every disaster simulation imaginable. It had never been designed to withstand orbital debris traveling at hypersonic speed. Warning alarms suddenly filled the shelter. Engineers stared in horror at their sensor displays. One shouted, "Impact detected directly above us." The ceiling trembled violently. Parents instinctively embraced their children as emergency lights flickered. A second impact struck with even greater force. Concrete supports cracked. Dust poured into the corridors. Far above the planet, Mercer watched new alerts flood across his tactical screen. His face turned pale. "Mara," he said quietly. "Get me the surface reports. Now." As the first casualty estimates began arriving, an uneasy silence spread across the bridge. No one spoke. No one moved. Somewhere on Haven's Reach, the consequences of one decision, one missile, and one terrible accident had already begun to unfold. The bridge of the Resolute Dawn fell into complete silence as casualty reports continued arriving from the surface. Commander Elias Mercer stared at the scrolling list, hoping each update would reveal the first report to be an exaggeration. Instead, every transmission made the situation worse. Entire rescue teams had been trapped beneath collapsed sections of Shelter 12. Medical drones were struggling to reach survivors because debris blocked the emergency tunnels. Lieutenant Mara Chen finally broke the silence. "Commander, the latest report confirms that the shelter took a direct impact." Mercer slowly closed his eyes. "How many?" Mara hesitated before answering. "The numbers are still changing. Rescue operations are ongoing." Mercer nodded solemnly. "Don't give me estimates. Give me facts when we have them." Within an hour, the first verified figures arrived. 43 civilians had lost their lives in the collapse. Among them were 17 human children who had been waiting safely underground when the debris struck. The bridge remained silent as every crew member absorbed the news. No one celebrated that the orbital battle itself had been relatively small. No one cared that the military objectives had technically been achieved. 17 innocent children were dead because politicians had approved an operation they believed would remain perfectly controlled. Mercer immediately opened a secure channel to Commander Kaylor Voss aboard the Iron Verdict. Kaylor's holographic image appeared, his expression as emotionless as before. "The operation has concluded successfully," Kaylor announced. Mercer stared at him in disbelief. "Successfully?" His voice was calm, but the anger beneath it was unmistakable. 17 children are dead. Kaylor glanced toward one of his officers before replying. Their deaths were unintended consequences of an interceptor engagement. Mercer stepped closer to the hologram. "Tell that to their families." Kaylor remained unmoved. "Every military action carries unavoidable risk." Mercer shook his head slowly. "No, Commander. Every military action carries responsibility." Before Kaylor could answer, another officer approached him carrying a data slate. The officer whispered something that caused Kaylor's confident expression to shift ever so slightly. "Report," Kaylor ordered. "Several long-range navigation buoys have unexpectedly gone offline," the officer said. 3 relay satellites stopped responding simultaneously. Kaylor dismissed the report with a wave of his hand. "Probably battle damage." Mercer noticed the exchange but said nothing. The communication ended moments later. On Arcanes Prime, Counselor Varix Thul addressed the media with visible satisfaction. Operation Silent Horizon has secured stability in the Orion frontier with minimal losses, he declared before dozens of reporters. One journalist raised a hand. Counselor, what about the civilian casualties? Varkani answered without hesitation. Every innocent death is regrettable, but the council acted within interstellar law. Our military followed proper procedures. Another reporter asked, some representatives claim the first rule has effectively been violated. Varkani smiled confidently. The first rule prohibited deliberate harm. These deaths were accidental. There is no reason for alarm. High Archivist Solinar watched the broadcast from his private chamber without saying a word. Beside him stood his young apprentice, Lyra. Master, she asked quietly, do you believe the council is right? Solinar's ancient eyes never left the display. History rarely distinguishes between intentional mistakes and careless ones, he answered. The universe only records the consequences. Lyra frowned. Do you think the old warnings were real? Solinar slowly walked toward an ancient wall covered in faded star maps. I spent centuries believing they were symbolic. He gently touched one weathered inscription. Today, I am no longer certain. Meanwhile, on Haven's Reach, rescue workers continued digging through the ruins of Shelter 12. Heavy construction mechs carefully lifted collapsed support beams while medical drones scanned for signs of life beneath the rubble. Mercer personally joined the rescue effort despite repeated objections from his officers. Dust covered his uniform as he helped carry survivors toward emergency transports. Every rescued child gave the exhausted workers renewed determination. Late that evening, one rescue engineer suddenly shouted, "We've got movement." Everyone rushed toward a narrow opening beneath a collapsed corridor. After several tense minutes, emergency teams pulled out a frightened 8-year-old boy covered in dust but otherwise unharmed. The child looked around in confusion before asking, "Where's my sister?" No one answered immediately. Mercer knelt beside him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We'll keep looking," he promised gently. The boy nodded, believing him completely. Mercer wished he possessed the certainty reflected in the child's eyes. As darkness settled over the colony, something far stranger began unfolding beyond human awareness. Automated navigation beacons scattered across nearby star systems started transmitting corrupted coordinates. Merchant vessels exiting hyperspace found themselves dozens of light years away from their intended destinations. A cargo captain contacted traffic control in confusion. "Control, our jump computer was perfectly calibrated. How did we miss the corridor by 37 light-years?" The controller answered with growing concern. "You're the 5th ship to report the same malfunction today." Engineers initially blamed software errors caused by the recent battle. Diagnostic programs were launched across the frontier, but every system reported perfect functionality. The calculations were flawless. The hardware showed no damage. Yet the navigation errors continued increasing. Aboard the Scientific Observatory Helios Array, astrophysicist Dr. Celine Aris monitored the region's quantum communication network. Her assistant suddenly looked up from his console. "Doctor, you need to see this." A 3-dimensional star map appeared above the central projector. Hundreds of tiny communication nodes blinked normally across known space. Then, one after another, several distant nodes briefly disappeared before reappearing seconds later. "Power fluctuations?" Celine asked. Her assistant shook his head. "No, they vanished completely. It's as if the signals had nowhere to travel." Celine frowned. "Run the diagnostics again." "Already did. Every relay is operating within normal parameters." The bridge lights flickered unexpectedly. Only for a fraction of a second. Then everything returned to normal. Every technician looked around uneasily. One whispered, "Did anyone else see that?" No one answered. Back on Varkani's Prime, High Archivist Solinar descended deep beneath the Council archives into chambers rarely visited by anyone. Ancient shelves stretched endlessly into the darkness, holding physical records preserved from civilizations that existed before digital memory. After several hours of searching, he carefully removed a weathered crystal cylinder sealed inside an ornate metal case. Dust covered its surface, suggesting it had not been opened for centuries. Lyra watched curiously. "What is it?" Solinar studied the faded inscription before answering. "It is the oldest surviving testimony from one of the Alliance founders." His hands trembled slightly as he activated the crystal. Most of the recording had decayed beyond recovery. Only a few fragmented sentences remained. An exhausted voice echoed through the chamber. If the first rule is ever broken. Static overwhelmed the recording. Then another fragment emerged. They must never discover. Why humanity? More static. Finally, the last surviving sentence played. By the time the signs appear, it will already be too late. The recording ended. At that exact moment, millions of kilometers beyond the borders of explored space, another ancient machine awakened. Massive rings larger than entire planets slowly began rotating for the first time in millions of years. Long-dead reactors reignited one after another, bathing forgotten structures in pale blue light. Across the endless darkness, silent signals spread from one dormant installation to the next, as if an invisible alarm had finally reached every corner of the galaxy. The first 17 children had died, and somewhere in the ancient machinery of the universe, something had noticed. Dawn broke over Haven's Reach beneath a sky that no longer felt peaceful. Rescue crews were still working around the shattered remains of Shelter 12, while smoke drifted slowly above the city of New Horizon. The battle in orbit had ended nearly 12 hours earlier, yet the colony remained under a state of emergency. Commander Elias Mercer stood beside the memorial wall that volunteers had assembled overnight. 17 small photographs had already been placed on it, each surrounded by flowers and candles. Families gathered quietly, refusing to leave despite the exhaustion written across their faces. Mercer removed his service cap and lowered his head. No speech seemed worthy of the moment. Lieutenant Mara Chen approached carefully. "Commander, Fleet Command wants your preliminary report." Mercer kept his eyes on the memorial. "Tell them they'll receive it when I'm finished here." Mara nodded. "Yes, sir." After a long silence, Mercer finally spoke. "Make sure every surviving family receives immediate assistance. Housing, medical care, counseling, whatever they need." Mara looked at him sadly. "It's already being arranged." Mercer sighed. "It isn't enough." She didn't argue because they both knew he was right. Meanwhile, aboard the Iron Verdict, Commander Kaelor Voss prepared his official mission summary. Operation Silent Horizon accomplished all primary objectives, he dictated to the ship's recorder. Enemy orbital defenses neutralized. Coalition casualties minimal. Civilian losses resulted from an unforeseeable chain of battlefield events. An intelligence officer interrupted the recording. "Commander, we're receiving unusual reports from neighboring sectors." Kaelor looked up impatiently. "What kind of reports?" "Navigation errors, failed communications, and unexplained sensor anomalies." Kaelor dismissed the concern. "Forward them to engineering. We'll investigate after returning to base." The officer hesitated. "The reports are increasing every hour." Kaelor simply replied, "Then engineering will have more data to study." Hundreds of light-years away, commercial traffic across the Orion frontier began experiencing increasingly strange problems. A passenger liner exited hyperspace nearly inside the gravity well of an uncharted neutron star despite following an approved route. Only the quick actions of its captain prevented disaster. Elsewhere, an automated mining convoy completely vanished while traveling through a perfectly stable jump corridor. The convoy hadn't exploded, changed course, or transmitted a distress signal. It simply disappeared from every sensor at the exact moment it entered hyperspace. Rescue vessels found nothing, not even wreckage. At the Helios Array Observatory, Dr. Celine Aras stared in disbelief at a massive holographic display filled with incoming data. "Run the calculations again," she ordered. Her assistant looked frustrated. "I've run them 7 times. Then run them an 8th." Minutes later the results appeared exactly as before. Every anomaly seemed unrelated. Navigation systems, quantum communications, deep space sensors, gravitational observatories. None of them shared hardware, software, or operating principles. Yet all were failing in subtle, unpredictable ways. Celine folded her arms thoughtfully. "This isn't a technological problem." Her assistant frowned. "Then what is it?" She looked at the growing pattern spreading across the star map. "I don't know, but it's behaving like something alive." Back on Arkanes Prime, the Galactic Council held an emergency session to address the growing disruptions. Councillor Varix Thull stood confidently before the assembly. "The incidents reported across the frontier are unfortunate but unrelated. Temporary instability often follows military operations of this scale." Several delegates nodded, relieved to hear a familiar explanation. "However, High Archivist Solinar remained seated in silence. Council Speaker Nald turned toward him. Archivist, you've requested permission to address the council. Solinar rose slowly. My fellow representatives, he began, for centuries we have obeyed the first rule without remembering its purpose. Yesterday, human children died during a council-authorized operation. Today, phenomena with no known explanation are spreading across civilized space. Varix immediately interrupted. Correlation is not causation. Solinar calmly met his gaze. No, but ignoring a pattern simply because we dislike its implications is not wisdom either. Varix laughed softly. Are you suggesting the deaths of 17 children are somehow disrupting the galaxy itself? I am suggesting, Solinar answered firmly, that we should not dismiss possibilities merely because they sound impossible. Several younger delegates exchanged skeptical smiles. One representative whispered, the old archivist has finally lost his mind. The vote to open a formal investigation failed by a wide margin. The council moved on to other business. Solinar quietly returned to his seat, but concern never left his face. A few hours later, Commander Mercer finally submitted his official report. Unlike Kaelor's summary, it focused almost entirely on the civilian tragedy rather than the military success. Admiral Sophia Reynolds contacted him immediately. Elias, she said, reading the document, this report is unusually direct. It needed to be. You've openly criticized the council's decision. I criticized their assumptions. The political consequences could damage your career. Mercer gave a tired smile. If protecting my career requires pretending 17 children were an acceptable cost, then perhaps I chose the wrong profession. The admiral remained silent for several moments. Finally she said quietly, I hope you're wrong about where this is leading. So do I. As the conversation ended, every alarm aboard the Resolute Dawn suddenly activated at once. Bridge officers rushed to their stations. Report, Mercer ordered. The tactical officer looked stunned. Commander. Our long-range sensors just detected an energy surge. Source? Unknown. Distance? Approximately 800 light-years, and growing. Mercer frowned. Growing? Before anyone could answer, every display on the bridge flickered violently. The star charts vanished, reappeared, then vanished again. Artificial gravity fluctuated for nearly 2 seconds before stabilizing. Crew members grabbed nearby consoles to keep their balance. Engineering called immediately. Commander, all reactor systems are normal. We have no explanation. The communications officer added, quantum communications across 3 neighboring sectors just went offline simultaneously. Mercer exchanged a worried glance with Mara. This isn't battle damage anymore. No, sir, Mara replied quietly. It isn't. Deep beneath the council archives, High Archivist Solinar continued examining the fragmented crystal recording he had recovered the previous night. Using ancient reconstruction algorithms, he managed to restore only a few additional words buried beneath centuries of data corruption. The damaged voice returned. The children are never the source. Static consumed the recording. Then another sentence emerged. They are the anchors. Again the message dissolved into noise. Lyra looked confused. Anchors? Anchors for what? Solinar slowly lowered the crystal. I don't know. He looked toward the ceiling as distant vibrations echoed through the ancient archive. For the first time in nearly 5,000 years, the council building itself had experienced a measurable seismic tremor despite floating within an advanced anti-gravity foundation. Something impossible was changing. Far beyond every explored star chart, hidden inside a region of space that no living civilization even knew existed, thousands of colossal structures continued awakening in perfect synchronization. Vast rings rotated around dark stars. Planet-sized machines emitted pulses of pale blue light that traveled silently across the void. One enormous construct, larger than a moon, slowly opened what appeared to be a massive gateway at its center. Nothing emerged from it, not yet. Instead, an ancient artificial intelligence activated for the first time since the dawn of galactic history. Its first scan swept across millions of star systems in less than a second. Then it reached the Orion frontier. A single message echoed through the endless machine network. Biological anchor integrity compromised. A pause followed. Then came a second transmission. Protective protocol failed. Finally, after millions of years of silence, the ancient intelligence issued the command that no civilization had ever lived long enough to hear. Initiate reality stabilization sequence. Level 1. 3 days after the tragedy on Haven's Reach, the disturbances could no longer be dismissed as isolated accidents. Across the Orion frontier, hyperspace travel had become dangerously unpredictable. Entire trade convoys were forced to remain in orbit because navigation computers could no longer guarantee safe jump coordinates. Insurance companies suspended coverage for deep space transport, freight prices tripled almost overnight, and food shipments to dozens of frontier colonies began arriving days late. What had started as a military incident was quietly growing into an economic crisis that threatened millions of lives. Commander Elias Mercer stood on the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, studying a holographic map covered with flashing warning icons. Lieutenant Mara Chen approached carrying another stack of reports. Commander, 27 colonies have declared local emergencies due to supply shortages. Mercer rubbed his tired eyes. Any explanation from the Navigation Authority? Mara shook her head. None that makes sense. Every computer passes diagnostics, but every jump solution changes between calculations. Mercer frowned, as if space itself refuses to stay consistent. Mara looked at him uneasily. That's exactly how the scientists are describing it. At the Helios Array Observatory, Dr. Celine Aris had barely slept in 72 hours. Hundreds of researchers from different civilizations now filled the enormous research station, comparing data from every major observatory in known space. One young physicist pointed toward a three-dimensional projection. "Doctor, we've found another pattern." Celine hurried over. The star map showed thousands of reported anomalies scattered across the galaxy. At first they appeared random. Then the computer connected them with faint blue lines. Every disturbance formed part of an enormous geometric lattice stretching across explored space. Celine's heartbeat quickened. Zoom out. The projection expanded farther and farther until the entire galaxy appeared suspended within an intricate web of invisible connections. The room fell silent. "This isn't random," whispered one scientist. "No," Celine agreed. "It never was." A communications officer suddenly called out, "Incoming transmission from the Council archives. High Archivist Solinar is requesting immediate contact." The elderly luminary appeared as a hologram above the central table. His face looked far older than it had only days earlier. "Dr. Aris," he said, "I believe your observations and my historical research are connected." Celine nodded. "We're listening." Solinar activated an ancient star chart recovered from the deepest archive vaults. Unlike modern maps, this one contained thousands of strange symbols instead of political borders. "My predecessors believed these symbols represented forgotten civilizations," Solinar explained. "And now?" Celine asked. "I believe they mark something else." "What?" Solinar hesitated. "Machines." The room became completely silent. "Machines built millions of years ago." Before anyone could respond, another researcher interrupted excitedly. "Doctor, long-range telescopes have detected artificial energy emissions from one of those marked systems." Celine immediately compared the coordinates. They matched perfectly. Solinar closed his eyes. "So they're waking up." Back aboard the Iron Verdict, Commander Kaelor Voss faced a crisis he could no longer ignore. His fleet had attempted to leave the Haven system 6 separate times. Every hyperspace jump had failed. Some ships exited only minutes after entering. Others appeared hundreds of millions of kilometers from their intended destination. One destroyer never emerged at all. His chief navigator spoke carefully. "Commander, I recommend suspending further jump attempts." Kaelor frowned. "Our drives are functioning." "Yes." "Our calculations are correct." "Yes." "Then explain why we cannot leave." The navigator lowered his head. "I can't." For the first time since the operation began, uncertainty appeared in Kaelor's eyes. He quietly dismissed the bridge crew until only his senior officers remained. Finally he admitted the words none of them expected to hear. Perhaps Commander Mercer was right. On Arcanes Prime, Counselor Varix Thul continued insisting that everything remained under control. "The galaxy has experienced technological disruptions before," he declared during another council session. "Panic serves no one." An older representative stood abruptly. "Then explain why 43 military navigation hubs have failed simultaneously." Another delegate added, Explain why quantum communicators are losing signals across sectors that have never experienced interference. A third representative shouted, explain why our exploration station in the Perseus Reach vanished without transmitting a distress call. Varkani opened his mouth to answer. Nothing came. For the first time, the chamber did not wait for him to speak. Voices erupted from every platform. Delegates argued. Some demanded investigations. Others demanded resignations. Several openly accused the council of ignoring the ancient warning. Council Speaker Now repeatedly struck the ceremonial staff against the floor. Order! Order! No one listened. Meanwhile, Mercer received an encrypted message from Dr. Celine Aris requesting an immediate meeting aboard the Helios array. Hours later, the Resolute Dawn docked with the research station. As Mercer entered the central laboratory, he immediately noticed something unusual. The room contained not only scientists but historians, linguists, mathematicians, archaeologists, and military analysts. Mara whispered, I've never seen this many disciplines working together. Neither have I, Mercer replied. Celine greeted them quickly. Commander, you need to see this. She projected the galaxy-sized lattice into the center of the room. Mercer stared silently. What is it? We don't know, Celine admitted. But every anomaly follows these invisible pathways. Solanar stepped forward. I believe this is some kind of ancient infrastructure. Mercer looked from the historian to the scientist. Infrastructure built by whom? Neither answered immediately. Finally Solanar spoke. By a civilization older than every species currently alive. One engineer interrupted nervously. We've confirmed active energy signatures from 9 different systems. Another added. Actually, he checked his console again. It's 12 now. The numbers continued increasing. At that moment, every light inside the laboratory dimmed. Emergency power activated automatically despite the station's reactors operating normally. A deep vibration echoed through the structure. Not violent. Almost rhythmic. The enormous holographic galaxy suddenly changed by itself. No one touched the controls. Bright lines spread outward from 12 distant star systems. Each pulse traveled across the invisible lattice at incredible speed. One by one, more points awakened. 20, 40, 100, thousands. The network was coming alive. A technician whispered in disbelief. The computers aren't generating this image anymore. Celine looked sharply toward him. What do you mean? The projection is receiving live telemetry. From where? He swallowed nervously. We don't know. Suddenly every communication screen across the laboratory filled with the same unfamiliar symbol. A perfect circle surrounding 3 interlocking stars. The symbol appeared on human equipment, alien equipment, military systems, civilian networks, even devices that were completely disconnected from external communications displayed it simultaneously. No transmission source could be identified. No encryption could explain it. The symbol remained visible for exactly 12 seconds. Then every screen returned to normal. The laboratory fell into stunned silence. Mercer looked toward Solanar. Have you ever seen that symbol before? The old archivist nodded slowly. Only once. Where? In the oldest surviving records of the Alliance founders. What did it mean? Solanar's voice became almost a whisper. They called it. He paused as if afraid to finish the sentence. The seal of the Guardians. Before anyone could ask another question, a priority alert sounded across every console. Long-range telescopes had detected something impossible. In one of the newly awakened systems, an object larger than a planet had changed position. Not by drifting through space. By moving under its own power. After remaining motionless for millions of years. The ancient machine had begun its journey toward the heart of the galaxy. The news spread through the galaxy faster than any official announcement ever could. Within hours, images of the moving planet-sized machine flooded every scientific network, military command center, and civilian news station. No one knew who had built it, how it functioned, or where it was going. Yet every observatory confirmed the same impossible fact. The object was accelerating without engines, without visible propulsion, and without violating any known laws of physics. For the first time in recorded history, every major civilization looked toward the stars not with curiosity, but with fear. Commander Elias Mercer remained aboard the Helios array with Dr. Celine Aris and High Archivist Solanar. The central laboratory had transformed into the galaxy's temporary crisis headquarters. Scientists worked beside military officers, historians argued with quantum physicists, and artificial intelligences analyzed millions of years of archived data every second. Lieutenant Mara Chen entered carrying a fresh intelligence report. "Commander, there are now 38 confirmed Guardian structures active across the galaxy." Celine immediately corrected her. 39. Mara looked surprised. "Another one?" Celine nodded toward the display. "It woke up less than a minute ago." Mercer studied the expanding map. Every awakened structure occupied a different region of the galaxy, yet their movements followed an unmistakable pattern. None approached populated worlds directly. Instead, they slowly converged toward invisible intersections within the ancient lattice that covered the galaxy. "They're not invading," Mercer said quietly. Solanar looked at him. "No. Then what are they doing?" The old archivist answered with a single unsettling sentence. "I believe they're trying to repair something." Before anyone could respond, every console in the laboratory chimed simultaneously. A secure transmission from the Galactic Council had arrived. Council Speaker Nal appeared as a hologram, her composed expression now replaced with visible concern. "Commander Mercer, Dr. Aris, Archivist Solanar, your immediate presence is requested on Arcanes Prime. The Council has voted to establish an emergency investigative commission." Mercer exchanged glances with Celine. What changed their minds? Nal hesitated. 3 Council worlds have begun experiencing the same anomalies. Denial is no longer politically possible. Several hours later, the Council chamber that had once echoed with confident debate felt strangely subdued. Representatives who had dismissed the first rule only days earlier now spoke in hushed voices. Giant holographic displays showed dozens of emergency situations unfolding across the galaxy. Merchant fleets remained stranded. Orbital elevators shut down unexpectedly. Entire communication sectors blinked in and out of existence. Most disturbing of all, every few hours another Guardian machine awakened somewhere beyond known space. Councillor Varix Thul stood before the assembly, but the confidence that had once defined him had disappeared. "We underestimated the consequences of Operation Silent Horizon," he admitted reluctantly. Murmurs spread through the chamber. An elderly delegate rose immediately. "Underestimated? 17 children are dead, trade is collapsing, and ancient machines are crossing the galaxy. Those are not consequences to underestimate. They are consequences to answer for." Varix lowered his head without replying. Council Speaker Nal turned toward Mercer. "Commander, based on your experience in the frontier, what is your assessment?" Mercer stepped into the center of the chamber. "I don't believe these events are acts of revenge." The delegates looked at one another in confusion. "If these machines intended to destroy us," Mercer continued, "they've had countless opportunities already. Instead, every movement appears deliberate. Controlled. So what are they doing?" asked another representative. Mercer glanced toward Solanar before answering. "I think we're witnessing an automated emergency response." The chamber fell silent. Dr. Celine Aris activated a massive holographic projection of the ancient lattice surrounding the galaxy. This time, the display included the current positions of every awakened Guardian structure. Thin streams of blue light connected them across unimaginable distances. "We've compared the machine's trajectories with the spread of the anomalies," Celine explained. "Every Guardian moves toward the regions experiencing the greatest instability." One delegate leaned forward. "They're repairing space itself?" "We can't prove that," Celine answered honestly. "But the evidence is becoming difficult to ignore." Suddenly the council chamber shook. Not violently. Just enough for everyone to feel it. Several delegates looked upward nervously. Technicians hurried to their consoles. One officer announced, "The tremor wasn't local." "What caused it?" "We're receiving gravitational fluctuations across the entire Arcanes system." Before panic could spread, the chamber's central hologram abruptly vanished. A blinding sphere of blue light formed in its place. Security guards instinctively raised their weapons. The light slowly condensed into the image of a towering humanoid figure nearly 4 meters tall. It appeared neither biological nor mechanical but something between the two, composed entirely of shimmering energy and geometric patterns that shifted continuously across its body. No one had activated the projection. No transmission had been detected. The figure simply appeared. A deep, calm voice echoed throughout the chamber. "Emergency observation protocol initiated." No translator struggled with the language. Every species heard the words perfectly in their own native tongue. Council speaker now found her voice first. Who are you? The luminous figure answered without emotion. Custodian Unit 712. Another delegate shouted, who sent you? The builders. Solinar stepped forward slowly. The civilization that created the Guardian Network? The figure turned toward him. Affirmative. A wave of whispers swept through the chamber. Mercer looked directly at the entity. If you're here to help, then tell us what's happening. For several seconds, the being remained completely still. Then it answered. Primary stabilization network has suffered localized degradation. Most delegates looked confused. Mercer frowned. What does that mean in plain language? The glowing figure replied immediately. Reality is becoming unstable. Complete silence followed. The custodian continued. Current degradation remains within recoverable limits. One representative let out a nervous breath. So it can be fixed? The being answered with a single word. Possibly. That tiny hesitation chilled everyone in the chamber. Dr. Celine Aris stepped forward. What caused the degradation? For the first time, the custodian paused longer than expected, as if processing information buried deep within ancient restrictions. Finally it spoke. The first rule existed to prevent this outcome. Every eye turned toward Varix. His face had gone completely pale. Solinar took another cautious step. For thousands of years we've obeyed that rule without understanding it. The custodian slowly inclined its head. Correct. Mercer asked the question that had haunted the galaxy since the tragedy on Haven's Reach. Why were human children so important? The luminous figure became perfectly still. Ancient symbols rippled across its body like waves moving across water. When it finally answered, its voice carried a weight that seemed older than the stars themselves. Authorization denied. A murmur of frustration spread across the chamber. The custodian raised one glowing hand. Explanation restricted until Phase 2 authorization. Mercer stared at the being. Then tell us one thing. The entity focused on him. Are we already too late? For the first time since it had appeared, the custodian did not answer immediately. Seconds passed. Then it finally spoke. Probability of complete recovery, 62%. The number echoed through the silent chamber. Not impossible, not hopeless, but far from certain. As every delegate struggled to comprehend what they had just heard, another alert erupted across the Council's emergency network. A second planet-sized Guardian had begun moving. Then a third, and this time, they were all heading toward the Orion frontier, the very region where 17 innocent children had lost their lives only a few days earlier. The galaxy had finally received proof that the first rule was real, but its greatest secret still remained hidden, waiting to be uncovered in the chapters ahead.